Hello all, my name is Edgar Bravo. Welcome to my final presentation to PSHS 6252 Emergency Management and Crisis Communication. For my second research paper, I chose the topic to do a critical comparison of the Boston Marathon and the San Bernardino shooting. This critical case comparison and critique showed the evolution of emergency management and crisis communication since September 11, 2001. The overview to this presentation will provide a quantitative explanation to the emergency response and crisis communication to both events. We will also incorporate the 4 phases of emergency management, which are mitigation, preparedness, recovery, and response. With the application of the basic working fundamentals of emergency management and crisis communication, I have evaluated and critiqued the leadership platforms and the crisis communications along with the leadership to these events. To begin, I will give a brief critique comparison to the Boston Marathon bombing, their strategic platforms, and their leadership. Their strategic platform, as we saw the events unfold of the Boston Marathon in April of 2013, the city was prepared for something. They just weren't prepared for an event of that magnitude. When you look at the risk assessment, they had indeed some hazards. They assessed some risks, and they had things in place to execute a plan in the event something would happen. Again, they were not expecting an event of that magnitude, but because they were prepared and because they did have some type of risk assessment for that type of event, this allowed them to easily flow into that incident command and that incident control right after those explosives went off. Because of that, the leadership in place, which was Governor Patrick Deval, Commissioner Ed Davis, the Colonel of the State of Massachusetts, Tim Albin, and their federal partners, the FBI, with Rick Deloria, they were able to respond to the event, mitigate further issues with injuries. They were definitely prepared, as I said, and they started efforts to prevent further attacks. By collaborating with state and with federal officials and fire and EMS, they were able to also begin their recovery phase. When you look at their leadership, especially with Patrick Deval, his professionalism, his ability to collaborate with all these different entities, whether it was the state, the commissioner, and the federal government, it was very incredible, and my hat was taken off to him and his approach to the situation. Throughout the entire event, you could see the unified effort between all the agencies. It wasn't just a federal effort or a state effort or a local effort, and it really was the governor of Boston that really kept everything together and mitigated all the parties. Because of this visionary and because of the trustworthiness that he established prior to this event with all these emergency management partners, they were able to save countless lives. And as we know, they were able to finally find the 2 culprits that were responsible for that bombing. As we segue into the next event, the San Bernardino shooting, there definitely was the same type of evaluation and critique with their strategic platform and their leadership. They were ready for an event. Again, they weren't ready for that type of terrorist event, but because they had identified hazards with active shooters and their preparations in responding to an active shooter, not just as a city, but with other agencies around that area, you were quickly able to see, again, those fundamentals of emergency management response with mitigation, preparedness, recovery, and response. Because they had prepared, they were able to mitigate the loss of life, and because they had prepared with fire, EMS, they were able to implement an incident command and start the recovery phase. That said, segue into their leadership. When you look at the goals of leaderships, you really want somebody who's trustworthy, who's professional. And in this event, my hat went off to Chief Jared Burkwan of the San Bernardino Police Department. There were other partners, along with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office. They had a public affairs liaison. His name is Brad Toms. As we've learned through our lectures, having a liaison and having a spokesman that's trained is very imperative in being able to communicate what's going on to the public and to reestablish that sense of security and safety in the public. Again, their efforts with active shooter preparation allowed them to respond appropriately, and I thought it was a job well done with not only the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, but all the smaller agencies, Colton Police, Redlands Police, and their partners, their federal partners, once they found out that this was an event inspired by terrorism. So when we look at the crisis communication of both events, you kind of reflect back on some of our coursework, and something that popped into mind were the 10 steps to crisis communication that Jonathan Bernstein put out. When you look at the IDing the crisis, having a spokesperson, the training of a spokesman, establishing the notification system, which in both events very quickly you saw the governor of Massachusetts and you saw the chief of police come out and start putting out hotlines. Next time, because there's going to be a next time when there's an emergency management response or an event of this magnitude, if you look at the media coverage of it, something that I started to notice are these hotlines. These hotlines are extremely imperative to not only the public being able to contribute their information to the event, which for the Boston Marathon bombing case, it led to the capture, or at least the identification of the two individuals that were responsible for that. And along with the San Bernardino case, it was the public that actually helped the law enforcement and the emergency response, and it was because they had established a notification system. Another advantage of having an established notification system is, these events do cause, great injury and death, and there's family members who are concerned and trying to find their relatives, and they also put out hotlines as to where these people can help locate their family members. All in all, their crisis communication on both events, when you look at their initial response in communicating what was going on to the public, how they were responding to it, what steps they were taking to mitigate further issues, it really was amazing. And not only was it amazing just to see that and how the public was going to interpret that, but in the case of Boston Marathon bombing, you saw partners from the federal agencies, from the state agencies, from the commissioner of the police department. All of them took their turn up on that podium. All of them had prepared and had training for an event, not in specific a terrorist attack, but they were prepared. They knew that they needed to communicate to the public what the incident was, where it was, what they were doing, to regain that sense of security and control. And that really is another important factor when you look at emergency management and response. That's bringing back that calm, that sense of security back to the public. I will say there were two issues with some of the strategic approaches with both events, as we saw with Boston bombing. There was local police who took it upon themselves to approach the two brothers, and that's where you saw the shootout in Watertown. I think that was maybe like a tactical issue and a communication issue where smaller departments knew what the rules were, but ignored them in times of being caught up in getting these two brothers and these two suspects apprehended. As you look further along with the Boston Marathon bombing, there was, a lot of controversy with the governor enacting a lockdown for 3 different neighborhoods in Boston. It received some criticism. However, it definitely was something that the citizens of Boston and the people in those communities really did listen to the governor, and they had no issues. The governor just seemed so in control of his state that the people followed along with that. When you look at the Boston Marathon, or when you look at the San Bernardino shooting, you saw some tactical issues as well with, their kind of strategic ways of approaching suspects. Again, you saw officers at the local level being caught up in the moment to try to, apprehend those suspects. And later on, I don't know if we all might remember how the suspects had an Apple phone and how the FBI was trying to have Apple create a key to get into that iPhone, and how that created such a controversy because of the implications of that technology. So there were some resonating effects of both events, but all in all, in my critique and comparison, when you look at the fundamentals and the phases of emergency management, both events showed that they had prepared for some type of event, which allowed them to mitigate some of the impacts of that event and allowed them to respond and recover. I'd like to thank you guys all for responding to my discussion points and adding to my academic experience. I wish you all happy holidays and a prosperous new year. Thank you.